So back in July, I was approached by one of the developers of Code Bunny to make a review of their game in time for its release on Steam. I thought the game looked pretty cool, and bunnies are my favorite animal, so I figured why not? Code Bunny was developed by Team Star, and it was shown off at Sage Sonic Amateur Games Expo from 2021 to 2023. The full game has been out since September of last year, but now it's getting released on Steam, so let's have a look. The game gives you the option to play as two characters, Axel and Hazel, with both of them having story modes that are told from their own perspectives. Both are members of the same space program who encounter a new group of enemies called the Mad Bunny Group. In Axel's story, he learns that the Mad Bunny Group are aware of who he is, and discovers that they're trying to gather comet shards to give to one of their members, Loon. Axel's a former ice skater who started working at the space program for his brother, Lucien, who had apparently died from a sickness but always wanted to explore space. When it comes to Hazel's story, she's a former army soldier who joined the space program, and after the Mad Bunny Group begins their attacks, Hazel decides to go after them and discovers that one of the group members is an old army friend, Shoko, who scolds Hazel for a terrible decision she made while in the army. I love that we can learn more about the characters' personalities and backgrounds based on which story mode you choose. If you play through as Axel, you still end up fighting Shoko, who still scolds Hazel despite her not being there, but Axel stands up for her just before they fight, which leads to Hazel talking to Axel later, thanking him for standing up for her. It's probably my favorite cutscene in the game, but I do like Hazel's version of it a bit more because they share a coffee together and that's kinda cute. At this point of the game, both Axel and Hazel encounter some pretty deep conspiracies about the space program, which also leads to us, the player, seeing both characters re-experience old memories just before the final level. I think I'm gonna cut off the story summary for now so everyone watching can go play the game for themselves. And another reason is that this game is pretty short, with each character story taking just an hour to play through, with 6 full levels to play. Looking at the gameplay, you can play as both Axel and Hazel, and I started out with Axel. The gameplay for Code Bunny is basically a 2D side-scrolling action game. Axel's gameplay is probably the most accessible in my opinion. He's the most speed-focused of the two, and has a basic punch attack, but his main ability is the spin attack, which I used constantly. It's almost similar to Crash Bandicoot, but Axel can also bounce off certain enemies if you time it right. It's pretty fun. Not only that, but you can even spin in the air and bounce off certain enemies to help reach other parts of the levels. Knowing Axel's backstory as an ice skater, I find the spin attack really fun to use and also a good representation of his personality. It's great. There's also the EX bar that you can fill up, and doing so will cause a shield to appear on Axel called the Aether Barrier, which can let Axel not take damage for a brief time. Plus, the more EX you collect from enemies, it can actually refill your health, which can be really easy to do as Axel, which is why I would consider him the most accessible of the two. I also played through the game twice as Axel, so I got pretty comfortable using him in most levels. When it comes to Hazel, I'll admit, her gameplay was a bit difficult to master. Hazel is still quick on her feet, but her gameplay is a bit more combat focused, especially since she's wielding a sword that can hack and slash enemies, way better than Axel's standard punch attack. But there's also a certain system to this. The sword that Hazel's carrying around was taken from someone important in her past, a mistake that she made in her past. So instead of EX, she has a karma bar. Going off what the Code Bunny website says, this directly affects her fighting style, making her stronger while also more vulnerable. As a result, if you're not careful, her health can actually decrease really fast, and unlike Axel, it's not too easy to refill it. And that aspect of her gameplay was kinda difficult for me to understand. Hazel can shoot the spear of some kind at enemies, which can allow her to basically home in on them. I'd say it's probably her most helpful move. And if you time it just right, she can also parry enemy attacks. So if you really enjoy games that are more combat focused, then Hazel's gameplay style should be easy to grasp. But I don't usually play these types of games, so I kinda struggled playing through her story at points. I will say, even though I found the game slightly more difficult to play through as Hazel, by the time I reached the final level and the final boss, I seem to have finally understood how the mechanics of her style worked. Since I did play through Axel's story twice and only played Hazel's story once, I'm sure a future revisit will likely make the gameplay easier for me. Before a few of the levels, the game will have you play a quick tutorial to help you figure out how to use the character's abilities. And if you're still struggling to learn how to use certain moves, you can pause the game to go look at the skill guide. There's just 6 levels in the game, or more so, Axel and Hazel play through 6 levels in their stories, but their 4th levels are different. You get ranked at the end of every level, and a lot of it seems to be time-based. And I think each stage does a really solid job keeping a fast pace. The levels you play through are Lumuna City, which reminded me a bit of the opening stage in Mega Man X, Forest of Morag, which I thought was a very pretty level, Yokiado, which might just be my favorite stage. I love the gust of wind during the platforming segments, and the overall aesthetics of the level are just nice. But when it comes to the 4th levels, they're different for each story. Axel plays through a stage called Underpass, which sort of represents Lamuna City a bit, and it's another decent level that even incorporates grind rails, which was really fun. Meanwhile, Hazel's 4th level is the Lagos Hyperbolics HQ, which features Hazel platforming on flying vehicles, and ends in a pretty crazy scenario with other versions of her popping out the background and fighting her. After that, they both play through the same 5th and 6th levels, with the 5th one being Wonderland, which is probably the most wacky level in the game, and it features these cool gimmicks where you have to hop through these blue hats, and you'll shoot out these red hats. Is that a Portal reference? I also like that rotating 3D clock tower in the background. That looked really cool. The last level is the Laster Core, which was a pretty insane one to go out on. The previous levels had the usual bottomless pits and such, but this level doesn't have that. Instead of bottomless pits, you'll just pop out the top of the level, which is pretty trippy. But they actually utilize this in some pretty fun level layouts, and some that require better thinking on how to get past certain sections. There's also instant killing lava here, so be on the lookout for that. Fortunately, the game doesn't have a life system, so the only real punishment is you getting sent back to the previous checkpoint. Your ranking's also going to be lower too, I guess. When it comes to the art style, I really like it. I think the art team did a great job representing the style. The soundtrack is good too. They really captured that classic sound and feel of retro games back in the day. I've been using music from this game throughout this review, so I would recommend the soundtrack to anyone who really likes this style. A lot of the tracks are catchy as hell. I really love the main space station music when you're about to head into a level. It's very relaxing. The soundtrack's also on Bandcamp for anyone to purchase. I'll leave a link to that and everything else in the description. And that's pretty much all of Code Bunny for me to talk about. It's a very short but fun 2D action platformer starring bunnies. Apart from the story mode, there's also a classic mode, where you can just play through the game without the dialogue or cutscenes. So if you want the game to be even shorter and more simple, then there you go. And the last mode is speedrun mode, where you play through all the stages back to back for the fastest time, which could be a pretty fun challenge. The build of the game I looked at was version 1.3, so there isn't too much in terms of extra content, though the dev who reached out to me to review the game said that they do plan on adding more content shortly after it launches on Steam. So if you were interested in this game, just be on the lookout for that. It's got a cool story, a great art style, fun gameplay, and a catchy soundtrack to boot. As I said, the game is launching on Steam the same day I post this review, so go wishlist and check it out when you can. It's a fun little game, and special thanks to the devs for reaching out and asking me to do this review, and I look forward to seeing what extra content they add later on. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next review. Later!